Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this new video, we are going to speak about double negation or negative concord in English. If you're new to this channel, here we speak about the grammar of the English language. If this is something that you're interested in, I suggest that you subscribe to this channel in order not to miss my new lessons. If you are a follower and you like what I'm doing, please consider supporting me here. This really motivates me to create new videos for you. Now let us start with today's topic. First and foremost, let's answer the question, what is a negative? A negative is a word or phrase that expresses disagreement with something. Negatives can appear in form of negative particles, negative verb forms, negative adverbs, negative determiners, and negative pronouns. Some examples of different types of negatives. For instance, negative verb forms are isn't, wasn't, don't, want, shouldn't, wouldn't, and so on and so forth. Negative pronouns are neither, nothing, none, nobody, no one, nowhere, and so on and so forth. Negative adverbs, for instance, are never, barely, hardly, scarcely, seldom, rarely, and so on and so forth. Please pay special attention to these words, because they do not contain any overly negative affixes. Still, they have negative meanings. These adverbs like hardly, scarcely, barely, as they carry negative meaning, as I have just said, may turn your affirmative sentences into negative. Let's look at some examples with these words. There is hardly any pasta left. So though we don't have any overly negative components here, you don't see the particle not, nothing like that, yet your verb is positive, there is, but this word, hardly, has negative meaning, and the whole sentence means that we almost don't have any pasta left, or we have very little pasta. Little is, by the way, is also one of those words that express negative meaning without any negative components in them. Another example, she could barely remember his face. Again, this sentence doesn't have any negative verb forms, any other negative elements in it, but what it tells us is she doesn't remember his face, or she almost cannot remember his face, to be more precise. Another example, seldom have I seen such courage. Seldom is a negative adverb, and here we see inversion. Seldom takes the first place, and when a negative adverb takes the first place in your sentence, the word order of the sentence should be inverted. So seldom have I seen such courage means that I have almost never seen such courage. And the last example, the room can hardly be ventilated because the windows do not open. What I want to say here is that we cannot ventilate the room properly because the windows do not open. So just keep in mind that in English we have those adverbs that imply negativity, though they do not have any negative components, any negative affixes, and these adverbs can turn your affirmative sentence into a negative one. Sometimes, when these adverbs are used at the beginning of the sentence, they require inversion of the subject and the verb. I say sometimes because that happens when you have auxiliary verbs. Otherwise, inversion is impossible. What is inversion? Inversion takes place when we invert the normal subject-verb-word order. By the way, I have a series of videos about the word order in English. The links to them you can find in the description to this video. Let's look at some examples. Never have I seen such a beautiful sunset. Never is a negative adverb. It takes the first place in your sentence. That means that we need to invert the order of words, in particular of the subject and the verb. We say have I seen, not I have seen. Rarely does he speak about his past. The same, rarely is a negative adverb, and as it takes the first place in the sentence, the word order of the sentence should be inverted. We say, does he speak? like in a question, right? Though it's an affirmative sentence. We don't say rarely he speaks. We say rarely does he speak. Seldom have we experienced such extreme weather conditions. Hardly ever does she miss a day of work. Scarcely had we entered the building when the fire alarm went off. Under no circumstances should you open the door to strangers. No sooner had he finished his speech than the audience erupted in applause. Now, that being said, let's return to our negatives. We discussed what a negative is, we looked at different examples, including those with negative adverbs. But what is a double negative? A double negation is a construction that occurs when two forms of grammatical negation are used in the same sentence. Examples. It's not unusual for people to lie about their income. In this sentence, we have two forms of grammatical negation. The first is the particle not, the second is the negative prefix un in the adjective unusual. So together they create a double negative. It's not unusual for people to lie about their income. This sentence actually means it is usual, it is typical for people to lie about their income. The final outcome was not unexpected. Here we also have two negative elements, the particle not and the negative prefix un in the adjective unexpected. This tendency has not gone unnoticed. The same, not and unnoticed. She said she didn't feel unwell. The particle not is connected to the auxiliary verb did here, so we have didn't as the first form of grammatical negation, and the second form of grammatical negation here is our adjective unwell. Un is a negative prefix. And my last example, he never says nothing about his plans. Never is a negative adverb, nothing is a negative pronoun. So these sentences all contain double negatives, but these double negatives serve different purposes. Today we'll see what these purposes are. Unlike in many Romance languages, and also in Russian, Polish, Bulgarian, Greek, and many other languages, Standard English does not have negative concord. What does it mean? That means that double negatives in English normally cancel each other. When you use two negative grammatical forms, they bring us to a positive meaning. Two negatives in one clause together produce an affirmative. In many languages, double negatives reinforce each other. It also happens in many English dialects, but not in Standard English. For example, in Italian, if you say non ho trovato nessuno, you get I haven't found anyone. So the sentence contains two negative elements, non and the pronoun nessuno, which corresponds to the English pronoun nobody. And this is what we typically say in Italian. Another example, non abbiamo detto niente. We haven't said anything. Again, non is a negative particle and niente means nothing, a negative pronoun. This is a norm for Italian as well as for many other languages, but not for English. Let's look at some examples in English. It's not nothing. This sentence contains two negative elements, not and nothing, and it actually means it's something. He's not uneducated. The sentence means he is educated. Two negatives cancel each other. They do not reinforce each other like in those Italian examples. It's not unlikely that we'll experience more rain this summer. Actually, it's likely that we'll experience more rain this summer. Again, two negative components, not and the adjective unlikely, they cancel each other. They do not reinforce each other. Here I should say that what I'm talking about now is standard, grammatically correct English that you are supposed to encounter in books, in literature, in documents, in formal communication, in any written form. But in real life, in real communication among different dialects, double negatives exist and they actually not always cancel each other. They can be perceived as reinforcing each other. We'll look at those examples at the end of today's class. As a language without negative concord, English has negative polarity words that are used in place of additional negatives when another negating word already occurs in the sentence. Such words are ever, anything, anyone, anybody, anywhere, and so on and so forth. Let's see. She hasn't loved no one in her life. The first negative element here is hasn't, has not. The second is this negative pronoun no one. Thus, we have a double negative in our sentence, and this is something that is not considered to be correct in Standard English. In Standard English, we should say she hasn't loved anyone in her life, so we should replace the second negative component with a negative polarity word, anyone. She hasn't loved anyone in her life. We can also say she has loved no one in her life. In this case, the pronoun no one will be the only negative element. The verb here is in its positive form. She has loved no one. The second sentence is emotionally a little bit stronger than the first one. Another example. I haven't never done anything like this. Here we have three negative elements. The negative verb form haven't, the adverb never, and the pronoun nothing. I haven't never done nothing like this would be considered incorrect according to the rules of Standard English. So what we are supposed to say is I haven't ever done anything like this. We should use this negative polarity words, ever and anything, and leave only one negative component. In our case, it's the verb form haven't. I haven't ever done anything like this. You can also say I have never done anything like this. Again, in this case, you will only have one negative element, an adverb, but your verb will be in its positive form. And again, this second option is stronger. I have never done anything like this. Then I haven't ever done anything like this. Now let's talk about functions of double negatives in English. Here we are to speak about two different uses, stylistic uses and dialectual uses, because as I have already mentioned, double negatives are natural for some dialects of English. When we speak about stylistic uses, we speak about two functions. Double negatives are used to express affirmation in a subtle way. We'll look at the examples in a minute. And also to intensify negation. Two uses that are actually very different, right? So first we'll speak about the stylistic uses. We'll start with double negation with adjectives and adverbs. Double negatives in English can serve stylistic purposes. One of those purposes is expressing affirmation that implies a little bit of doubt. To get this effect, we are going to use not with our verb form and an adjective or an adverb with a negative prefix. Typically it's an or in, or its versions like im, il, ir. Let me demonstrate. His work was not unimpressive, but it didn't stand out either. What we want to say here is actually that his work was not very good, or not good at all, but we want to soften this affirmative sentence, yeah? We want to make it a little bit less strict. So we use two negative components in order to express a softened affirmation. So his work was not unimpressive means his work was pretty good, but not really impressive. Another example, doing this wouldn't be unreasonable. For instance, we want to insist on something, but we don't want to be very pressing. And to soften our sentence, we use wouldn't together with an adjective with a negative prefix. Doing this wouldn't be unreasonable means doing this is reasonable to some extent. And her explanation was not illogical, but it lacked clarity. What we mean is her explanation was logical to some extent. I hope you understood how it works. Now let's go to a little bit different stylistic function of two negatives. Please pay your attention that two negatives do not always cancel each other. In some cases, they may intensify negation. And this will be another stylistic use of double negatives. For instance, I won't never lie to you. In the sentence, two negatives intensify each other, and what the speaker wants to say that he will never ever lie to somebody. She can't do nothing when she's stressed. Again, these two negatives, can't and nothing, intensify the negation. The speaker wants to express that there is absolutely nothing that she can do when she is stressed. She's absolutely helpless. This intensifying function we can see in those clauses or in those sentences where a verb or an adverb is in between our two negative components. For instance, in the second example, she can't do nothing. Do appears between two negative elements, can't and nothing, right? But in the first sentence, those kind of rule does not work. I won't never lie to you. Two negative components go just one after another. Pay attention that these sentences are emotionally colored. This emotion is something that you can easily show in communication, but it's very difficult to render it in writing. That's why we say that there is no place for double negatives in written English, in standard English. Yes, though of course in communication you will hear them a lot, because in communication you can easily express what exactly you mean by putting a particular stress in your sentence. Thus, in this function, double negatives work much better in speech than in writing. Compare these two sentences. I will pronounce them with appropriate intonations. There isn't nothing we can do. The sentence means that there is something that we can do. And this one, there isn't nothing we can do. We can do nothing. So you see, the usage here is very ambiguous. In writing, it totally depends on the context, on the stress and on the emotions that you express when you say this or that sentence. Now look at this sentence. How do you understand it? I didn't go nowhere yesterday. It's pretty difficult to get it without intonation, isn't it? This sentence can actually mean both. I went nowhere yesterday and I did go out yesterday. Let me try reading it with intonation. I didn't go nowhere yesterday. The sentence means I did go out yesterday. There was some place I went to, and I didn't go nowhere yesterday merely says that I went nowhere yesterday. It's just a negative sentence, yeah? Two negative components intensify each other and express a negation. And what about this sentence? You don't know nothing. Again, without me showing you emotions when I read this sentence, it's not clear what it expresses. It can mean you know nothing, and it can also mean you do know something. For instance, you don't know nothing. You know something. You see? Now the sentence has new colors, and you get it as you do know something. But you don't know nothing, a stricter and a colder intonation makes you feel what the speaker wants to say is that you know nothing. Now let's look at somewhat different cases when we may have two negative components, but they perform neither of the functions that I have mentioned. I didn't not go to the party because you were there. The reason why I didn't go was because I had no clothes appropriate for such a party. You see, though, here we have two negative components, one right after another. I didn't not, but not belongs to a bigger part. Didn't negates this whole part. Not go to the party. I didn't not go to the party because you were there, right? Another example. They weren't doing nothing when I arrived. They were preparing for their exam. Nothing is the word that is being negated. So though we have two negatives here, they neither function as intensifiers of each other, nor express that subtle affirmation. It's a totally different scenario. Another example: he didn't do nothing when he read the news. He made sure there was no more money left in his bank accounts. Nothing is negated here, right? And it is not unlikely. It's nearly impossible. The adjective unlikely is negated. So look at these examples attentively and keep in mind that you might have two negative components that must be there in your sentence, and that will be grammatically correct according to the rules and norms of standard English. The sentence will not be emotionally colored. Neither of those stylistic functions that I have mentioned before may be performed. This can simply be a different kind of situation. One of those two negative components that you have may be just an object of a negative verb, an object that is being negated. Now, as we have already discussed stylistic uses, let's look at dialectual uses of double negatives in English. So as we said, standard English doesn't have negative concord, but you may have two grammatically negative components that do not cancel each other but just coexist. It is normal for some American English dialects, African American English, and also some British English dialects. Before we proceed to examples, let's make sure that we all know and understand this word. Ain't. Ain't is absolutely informal. You're not supposed to use this word in writing, in any official papers. So it's informal, and it's a contraction of am not, are not, and is not. So basically, in dialectual use, you can use it with any person. You can say we ain't, I ain't, she ain't, and so on and so forth. It is a negation that is used in present, but not only in the present simple tense, but also in the present perfect tense. So ain't actually can also mean has not or have not. Ain't got, for example, means haven't or hasn't got. There are also structures like ain't any, ain't none, and ain't no in dialectual colloquial use. Let's look at some examples. We ain't never really had no tornadoes in this area here. Ain't is one negative element, never is the second negative element, and we have one more, which is no. In general, three negative elements in one sentence. So we ain't never really had no tornadoes is an example of a dialectual use of multiple negatives in one sentence. Can I have another can of beer? We ain't got none left. We ain't got none left. We have no beer left. She ain't never done anybody no good. She has never done anybody anything good. From now on, it ain't your problem anymore. From now on, it's not your problem anymore. I ain't got no time for this nonsense. That is, I don't have any time for this nonsense. And you ain't gonna get no better deal than this. You're not going to get any deal better than this. Now, when we speak about dialectual use, it's not only about ain't, it's also about other verbs, other negative elements, other types of double negatives used in one sentence or in one clause. So let me show you several more examples. Neither of the boys can't play tennis. Neither is a negative pronoun, and can't is a negative verb form, so they coexist in this sentence, and it actually means that neither of the boys can play tennis. I don't eat no fish. I haven't got no time to waste on trivial matters. She didn't say nothing to nobody about the secret. These are all examples of some dialectual use of two negatives. Let me show you two more examples. He don't know nothing about fixing cars, and she don't want none of that soup. Apart from two negatives in each of the sentences, we also have don't, which is used with the third person singular. In standard English, to be correct, we should say he doesn't and she doesn't, but in dialectual use, you might hear don't used together with he and she. so he don't know nothing. Yes, such sentences exist in the language. This is called vernacular English, and it doesn't mean bad English, it's just English as it is. We have some rules that we are to learn and follow for our speech to be standardized, for it to be perceived as correct. But languages are alive. The way real native speakers speak those languages is not always the same thing that is written in the book. I think we are to finish on this philosophical note here. If you have any questions to me about the examples that I have given in this class, or about any other information that you have heard today, please write them in the comment section down below. This is all for today. I hope this video was useful. Subscribe to this channel not to miss my other lessons. Write your comments in the comment section down below, and see you in the next video.